Welcome to episode number 12 of Education, a Clusterfuck in Need of Repair. The title of this episode is A Very Smart Guy Talking About a Very Smart School. Before we start, I'd like to emphasize that all ideas presented in this podcast are my own and do not reflect the thoughts, opinions, or positions of my employer, Emerson College, its programs, or its representatives.
It's very much about how can we figure out a way to make kids learn by solving a problem that requires them to use their minds well. I got to change the school from being one where there would be a play every couple of years if we were lucky, to being a place where there is a play twice a year, every year on a regular schedule. We're a fairly standard academic high school. We just run things a little bit differently. Having said that, the other change is kids really do learn to use their minds well.
When I was thinking about where to go from here on this podcast, I was driven by three powerful forces. One, I need some hope, and most of the people I know need hope too. No offense to those listeners out there who already have plenty of hope and are puzzled by this motivator. And if you want to share the wealth, send your hopeful perspective to me at education, clusterfck@gmail.com, and I will shout it from the rooftops. Or actually, I'll share it on my podcast. I mean, rooftop shouting is so bad for you. Nobody wants a raspy, strained voice or nodes on their vocal cords. 2, I want to explore some positive outcomes in current educational settings, and not tepid, flabby outcomes like our vandalism numbers are down, but positive outcomes that might cause someone, like maybe a young person with good joints, to fist pump and scream, yes! Finally, number 3, I want to explore how constructivist learning theory contributes to numbers 1 and 2. But shall I lecture on constructivist learning? That's some old cheese, after all, and modern test-based schools snort at those quaint, outdated ideas. But I literally can't stand to see constructivism become to education what Tiananmen Square is to Chinese 20-somethings. A mystery, unknown, puzzling, a reference without substance. For further clarification, listen to episode 2. Yes, I'm now officially a panderer. Oh well, I've been called worse. A non-detour. This pertains. I like whole-to-part teaching. That's where you start with the big idea and then break it down so students have a context for understanding its component parts. A colleague of mine, Bob Colby, used this metaphor. The kids are learning how to dig a hole in the ground. In part to hole teaching, you show the kids a shovel. You label the parts, blade, handle, shaft. You have them color a picture of a shovel and label the parts themselves as an informal assessment. You give a lecture on safe shovel usage. Then you model how to hold the shovel, the correct angle at which to place the blade against the ground, where to place your foot, and how hard to press. Only then do they actually attempt to use the shovel. In whole-to-part teaching, you hand the kids a shovel and tell them to dig a hole. As they work to figure it out, you side coach them on safety, holds, and angles. The whole group learns from each kid's experience. Hole dug. Voila. So I've decided to approach my love of constructivism through a whole-to-part methodology. Over the course of the next 5 or 6 episodes, I'll be exploring ways that the stinky Roquefort of constructivism lingers in current schooling. Sometimes a small whiff, at other times a real snootful, and how it still offers the same promise that it did 30 years ago, fostering student engagement, enriching learning experiences, acknowledging the strengths and skills of the students, and helping them build complex meanings on top of the foundational understanding of earlier years. Constructivism is the Roquefort and bacon on a wedge salad, turning it from a hunk of iceberg lettuce to a delicious treat the diners pay $6 for. A detour. That took you a while. I thought you'd lost your edge. I hear you cry. Never. I just noticed that the word iceberg has worked its way into this episode without any reference to the Titanic. How often does that happen? I mean, when's the last time you used the word iceberg in regular speech? But anyway, I like Barbara Rogoff's take on the components of constructivism from her 1990 book, Apprenticeship in Thinking. Here's a short overview of the list of 9 elements that will guide the next few episodes. 1. Students make meaning from the things we teach them. 2. Knowledge is socially and culturally situated, meaning different things for different kids. 3. Contexts for learning are a requirement for retention of knowledge. 4. Students need to engage actively with hands-on tasks that have real-world applications in order to maximize learning and understanding. 5. Students can only learn information that is scaffolded on understandings they already hold. 6. The role of the teacher in constructivist learning is that of a coach or facilitator. 7. Emotion holds a complex role in learning, and a student's sense of belonging in the learning community is critical for success in learning to happen. 8. As part of belonging, constructivist teaching emphasizes the importance of small group learning and peer mentoring. 9. Constructivism recognizes that higher order thinking is content dependent, that analysis, evaluation, and synthesis rely on the presence of context and subject matter to occur. I'll eventually explain these in greater depth, but not today. But in the spirit of hold-apart learning, I hope you'll listen to this interview with Ryan Ruopp. He teaches at the Francis W. Parker Charter School, a charter school in Devens, Massachusetts. The school is based in constructivist teaching and learning and follows the tenets of Ted Sizer, a fucking incredible educational theorist. And I'll talk more about him in subsequent episodes too. Hold apart, remember? Ryan is, as the title of this episode suggests, a very smart guy. And we had fun talking together about how the Francis W. Parker Charter School uses the freedom it has as a charter school to create a different model for teaching and learning, freed from the constraints of typical public school structures in Massachusetts. Listen to the episode. See if you can find examples of each of the 9 elements of constructivism identified by Rogoff in the stuff they do at the school. Or even better, examples from your own practice in the places you teach. There won't be a test, there won't be a reward or a detention, but it might be interesting as you sit stuck in traffic listening to this podcast. I really hope so, because though it's a charter school, the Francis W. Parker is a public school that emphasizes autonomy, mastery, and purpose for their teachers and their students. And their success in doing interesting and cool stuff in education gives me hope. And I need hope. Because it isn't impossible to do this. Just because the media and pundits say so doesn't make it true. They're often full of shit. But Ryan isn't. So grab a shovel and start digging. Our guest today is Ryan Ruopp, who is a teacher at the Francis W. Parker Charter School. And I asked him if he'd be willing to be interviewed because years ago when I was thinking about starting a school, I toured the Francis W. Parker Charter School, and I was really struck by their approach to teaching and learning in terms of constructivist learning, child-centered education, and multiple intelligences approaches to education. And I liked the school so much, and many of their practices reflect what we as a country still know to be best practices in education. And so I asked Ryan here because in the way the school system's going right now, it's impossible to teach that way and achieve what we want to achieve, which I'm not always sure what that is, but it's impossible. And I thought I would bring someone in who has real life experience teaching, using best practices, and succeeding in the classroom. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I have so much to say about Parker. I really like it quite a lot.
I love that place, and if I didn't live so far away, I would apply for a job there. Okay.
Yeah, they're hiring a principal right now.
That's not the job I want. I think one principalship was enough for me.
Fair
okay.
enough.
So how long have you been teaching at Francis W. Parker?
This is my 20th year. I was teaching 9th and 10th graders, which they also call Division II for about 15 years. And then for the last 5, I've been teaching 11th and 12th graders. And the last 3 or 4, I can't quite remember, I've been a senior advisor.
And the school is a K through 12?
It's a 7 through 12.
7 through 12. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. It's just interesting the number of capacities that you've had there, where right now you kind of choose your area of licensure and you're locked in.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like an endless amount of things to say about why that is. But, so Parker, the history of it is that it comes from people who were really interested in the ideas of Ted Sizer, who wrote a book called Horace's Compromise, which is basically about how over-specializing teachers and forcing them to do so much that they're not able to work to the best of their capacity is really a problem. And it causes teachers who are great people to do mediocre work. And so the school is built around... I mean, I can talk about this forever, but it's built around 10 common principles, which are his reform ideas. So for that reason, I've been able to do things like be the person who teaches a world theater class and also the person who teaches a class that is a combination of ethical philosophy and the history of American prisons. And that's, probably not something that happens in other schools.
It's funny because that's very much speaks to the type of person you are, because I know you a little bit.
Sure.
But I can think of other teachers who would thrive having the opportunity to teach something that is apparently so far outside of the scope of their main area of licensure. Anyway, okay. Can you talk about the structure of the curriculum there a little bit? What sets it apart from more traditional public schools? Because it's a charter school, but it is a public school.
All right. So the question I have for you is, do you want me to talk for 45 minutes or 2 minutes? Because
let's go somewhere in the middle. But this is like an hour-long interview, so let's say 3 to 5.
All right, the 3 to 5 minute version. I'm trying to calibrate that. Okay, so the thing that I think people will immediately notice about Parker that makes it different is that it doesn't have traditional grades like there is 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, but it's referred to as divisions. Kids from different age cohorts are mixed together in every classroom. That's because the idea of the school is that kids are supposed to practice skills until they're good enough at them that they can move on to a higher level of challenge. Obviously, different assignments are at different levels of challenge, but in general, what happens is that after a couple of years of Division 1, students have done enough work that they're able to apply to do what we call gatewaying into Division 2, and they have to put on a whole reflective performance of, these are all the things I've done in the arts and humanities, and here is why I believe that I can go do this other work, and then they move. And they get a chance once every semester to do that. So there's that system. There's also, we don't have traditional grades. There are no numbers at Parker. When you hand in an assessment, because we're a project-based school, so our projects are called assessments, and they are in a variety of skill areas, and there's lots of jargon that we use. But basically, your assessment is assessed on a rubric that has a bunch of specific criteria, and if you don't meet standards the first time you hand it in, you are supposed to try to revise it in order to show that you can do a better job. And often people revise things and they still don't meet standards, and we say, that was amazing, you showed so much growth. And then they move on to the next thing, because that's okay.
Yep.
And everything kind of works like that. I just have to
interrupt. So you do a ton of narrative assessment all the time.
Yeah.
Because when I was at Sparhawk, when I was head of school, we did straight out just narrative assessment, and oh my God, that's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, it's a balance, and I think people have to find how much they can manage, but at the minimum, you have to narratively assess every assessment. So that's 3 per class for me. And then you have to write progress reports, and that's whatever that is. I only have to do 50, which is pretty reasonable.
Only 50? You are so lucky.
Once every couple of months. Well, but the poor math teachers really, because of the way it breaks down, like the guy who teaches calculus and physics literally teaches every single upperclassman in the building.
Oh my God.
He has just developed this inhuman system of, like what the kids will say is, he assesses all our work immediately. It all comes back the next day, always. Yeah. Because for him, he can't ever get off the treadmill, or everything will back up. I'm not nearly so responsible, but I still, I'm giving a lot of feedback on a lot of work. I think one of the things, though, that needs to be said about that is, yes, I'm writing a lot, but I'm also conferencing with kids a lot, because that's built into the curriculum. So one of the things that's philosophically really important at Parker is the idea of the model of students as workers and teachers as coaches, which I know is classic in the
Sizer education of essentials.
Right, that's what people do. But we really do live that. So it does feel like in my classes, my kids picked the elective they're in, and again, there aren't electives until you get to Division 3, but once you get there, they chose to be there. Presumably this is stuff they're interested in, or this is a type of skill that they really feel they need to work on. And so I am coaching them to get there. That's my role. It's not, I'm surprised by how often it really genuinely can feel collaborative. Like I'll say, okay, we're doing like the project that kids finished out, that class I just talked about, the history of prison one. They had to design a correctional institution and like literally build models out of folded paper and stuff. And I made them do everything to scale so it would feel appropriately architectural. I'm surprised by how often they have ideas that I never would have thought of. Yeah. And they're able to create things that are really beautiful, and they're able to explain them in ways that are really interesting. And so I do feel like I'm a project manager. I'm not really teaching them these things because I didn't know them. Yeah. Right? I just pointed them.
Well, that's why I love teaching. I say this to students all the time, because I love to learn. I can't afford to stay in school, because you have to pay to do that.
Exactly.
But I teach because I love to learn, and they come up with stuff that I'm like, I would not have thought of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Is the history of prisons course, is that a Division 3 level course?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's so Division 1, there are no electives. You just do whatever they tell you, basically. Although I would say, in terms of the curriculum there, if you want to get a sense of it, They do things like, well, I'm talking about arts and humanities and not MST right now, which is math, science, and technology. So much jargon. But they do things like they have a Goldsworthy statue project where kids are going outside and they're learning to make sculptures out of natural objects and find patterns, and they talk about, iterations and metaphor and meaning, and by the end, the whole, what we call the outback, which is where the playground would be at a normal school, it's just covered in things made out of pine cones and rocks and sticks. And they do Romeo and Juliet monologues as literary interpretation, and it's just it's very much about how can we figure out a way to make kids learn by solving a problem that requires them to use their minds well. And that's how we know that we've designed something right, is if they're doing that.
I'm really struck by how much of what you're talking about involves higher order thinking.
Yes.
Critical thinking. You want to talk Bloom's taxonomy, the top 3 layers, right? Even their final presentation to get out of Division 2 or whatever is a synthesis. Can you talk just for a minute about the way in which teachers are paired in the humanities?
Yeah. Okay. So all teaching in Division 1 and Division 2, but not in Division 3, because the needs of the seniors and the needs of the juniors are very different. So all teaching in those first 2 divisions is team teaching. And in that way, typically they try to get somebody who has a little bit more of an English background with somebody who has a little bit more of a history background. But that's not always how it works, because, for example, one of my favorite teaching partners, both of us had a lot of literature background and a lot of history background, but just in different things. And so then it was just very fun to work with her because we could back each other up on just about every subject. Another example is I'm really one of the only teachers in the building with a lot of formal training in theater, although that's changed over the years. Sometimes there's more people. And there's really only one person with a substantive background in music. And so what that means is I got to change the school from being one where there would be a play every couple of years if we were lucky, to being a place where there's a play twice a year, every year on a regular schedule. And Jim, who is the guy who has the music background, changed the school from being a place where there really wasn't a consistent music program to a place where we have done musicals, and there is a brass band that plays next door to me while I am trying to conduct rehearsal every day. And I love that. I love that very much, Jim. I hope you are listening and you are aware of how grateful I am to the sounds of Jurassic Park.
Let me ask you Jim. How many students are at the school?
We try to stay at 400 because that's what our charter wants us to be at. And obviously, we're a charter school, so our funding is based on how many kids come.
Yep.
So, so right now I think we're at 390. And that's something we actually, there was a pretty serious enrollment problem for a lot of schools that hit 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a little bit of it was a challenge for Parker. We had to make budgetary decisions that were not easy, and we have, I think, largely fixed the problem now. But in general, it's about 400 kids. At a couple years we were at like 410, and that was actually not great. Like it turns out to matter.
Oh, it seems like you're just creeping up a couple of kids at a time. It's a huge difference. Yeah. Okay. So, can you talk about impacts you've seen on the students from this approach to teaching and learning?
Yeah. Well, again, it's like any 7 to 12 school, it's a 6-year program, so I don't see every single kid all 6 years. But I have taught students whose parents said, we thought that our kid couldn't learn. They literally hid under tables when teachers tried to talk to them. And they did that in 7th grade, and then they did that a little less in 8th grade, and then they became broadly functional by, Division 2 and Division 3. Having said that, I think sometimes because of stories like that, people get the idea that Parker is designed to be a sort of like a mental health school, and it's not. I think we're very good at helping students in that way, but that's not who we are. We're not a therapeutic school. We're a fairly standard academic high school. We just run things a little bit differently. Having said that, the other change is kids really do learn to use their minds well. That's the thing that you really like. If you want to get the best impression of Parker, subscribe to the Parker YouTube channel. On the YouTube channel, we video all of our graduation ceremonies. Watch the graduation ceremony. Watch what the kids say about what Parker did for them. It makes them confident. It makes them think people can trust them. It makes them think they can do hard things. That's really what I see.
That's lovely. Because I worked in a school that did that too. And when people talk about how it's not possible, I'm like, no, we are not prioritizing it.
Yes.
It's not happening because we're not prioritizing it in our schools. It actually can happen. You have to choose.
Yes.
You got to choose. Okay. Speaking as a teacher, what are some of the benefits of this system for your job, your work?
So in terms of how it affects my ability to do my job, I think this is a place where I can only speak from a place of privilege. I have been working there my entire professional career. I had one moment where that's not the environment I was working in, and I've visited other schools and looked at how people live in other places, but mostly my experience is I don't know how I would function in a place that didn't work the way Parker works, because the amount of, I'm just thinking about things like some of your conversations with people where they talk about the miracle of being able to get a box of colored pencils. And I just think, our school isn't pretty. It really isn't.
No, it's not pretty.
It's a but I can get colored pencils if I want them. If I want to take kids to a play, the answer is gonna be yes, right? I might need to be a little bit patient in making sure I'm working with everybody to get that field trip functioning, but I know that all the people who I need to get those yeses from, the people in the cafeteria and the head of my domain and the nurse and all those people want me to succeed in whatever it is that I'm trying to do. And it's not just that they want me to succeed because they like me personally. There's definitely been years where some of those people were a little irritated with me and the things I was trying to do. But the mission of the school is to support the teachers. So I know they're going to support me because they think that's their job.
Yeah.
And that's also how they treat everybody else. And so...
Wow.
I guess I feel like I can try... just the prison project I just talked to you about. I had a meeting. We had to... So one of the things that happens is that all of the domains have a weekly 1-hour meeting. And actually, some of them really have 2 of them, because if you're teaching Division 2 AH, you're teaching the same curriculum across 3 different teaching pairs. And that curriculum has to be designed by that group of 6 people. Yeah. And so they have to work pretty hard together to make sure that they're relatively in step with one another.
Yeah.
In Division 3, where you're all kind of teaching your own classes, it's a little bit more like a traditional high school. We don't need to do as much coordination, but we still are meeting for an hour a week, which is, as it turns out, 1,000,000 times more than anyone else in any other high school gets to meet with their colleagues.
Yes.
And in one of those meetings, I said to my domain leader, we have this research project where we do a prison proposal, and I am frustrated with it because I don't think the thing that I'm getting the last 2 times I taught the class is really an academically rigorous piece of research, because I'm asking the kids to do too many things. So I want to split it in half and have the research part come first and then do a different assignment that is an artistic expression, which is the name of a skill area we have, where they just do architecture. And I teach them about design, and they draw a scale model of the thing they've proposed. And I think that it will take them a couple of weeks to do a really good job. And she said, "You're not an architect. I don't feel like this feels a little risky, right? Like when you're doing drama, I know you have a background in that. When these other teachers are doing music or visual arts, like those are things that they have a background in. You're kind of stretching in this way. Like, are we going to get work that is at the level of excellence that we really want?" And I said, "Yes, here's my plan for it." And instead of saying, "No, I'm gatekeeping this because of, whatever hoops you have to jump through," right? Yeah. She said, "Okay." And then I got to do this thing. And it's not just that happened, it's that I wasn't surprised that happened. I was a little surprised that she even raised the concern, because that's what it's like working where I work.
Yep.
And the models are pretty good. Like at least they're good enough that I put them on a display and people look at them and tell me they like them.
Nice. Even just the question of, I was used as an example, and when you finished your research project, if you want to, you can draw a cover for it for extra credit.
Yeah.
But to have the design of the prison be half of the course, the learning in the course, that's multiple intelligences in action. I'm sorry, it just like
it's funny because it's funny because I mean, just going back to working with you as a student, I remember reading Gardner and reading criticism of Gardner and the way that he kind of explains it, and sort of thinking, well, this sort of feels like, on the one hand, this is just obviously how you should teach, because if you present somebody with doing the same thing all the time, they're going to get bored, and different people have different entry points.
Very quickly, even. Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't feel like, I guess the thing I've always been skeptical of is I don't really feel like there's a magical thing where some kids can only learn visually. It feels more like you just have to give people lots of ways to be interested in things all the time, because that's how you as a human being are also interested in things all the time. And I don't know. It seems to work for most students, is my experience. Having worked in a school that taught that way, I would agree.
Okay. When I visited the school during my dream stage, I was really interested in the agency I saw among the kids, just their ownership of the space. So we're walking down the hall, and there are kids sitting on the floor along the hall eating lunch, which is something that I saw in the school I sent my kids to, which was also alternative in some of the same ways. And but in public school, that is not what you see. Okay, no. That level of ownership
you have to be in a cafeteria.
Of the space, right? And so, can you talk about how the structure of the school fosters and supports agency in the kids? You've hit on it a little bit, but I'm...
Okay, so it's really funny because I wrote a bunch of notes about that, and I was thinking as I was writing the notes, these are lies, because there's
a set of... to tell me that.
No, because there's a set of things that we say to people because it's easy to understand that these things foster agency, and it's not that they're not true, they are true, it's just not really where the agency lives.
Yep.
So the surface level is there's a bunch of structures that are designed to make people feel that the school gives kids agency, such as there's a community congress that writes the constitution of the school and runs the gathering we have every month with all the students. And they are important and they do good work, but not everybody's in the community congress. There's a senior steering committee that runs prom and events, and there are events for the whole school that are run by kids. There are electives that kids get to choose. There's discretionary time for the older kids, so they get to pick where they want to be and where they want to study for 1 block a day. So there's those things that are structured into the school. And it is actually, I think, really important that there are specific structures coded into the way the day works that send the message, this is a place where you have ownership. But that's not really where we care about the ownership being. Because really what we care about is that kids have ownership of their own academic career, and they feel like the thing I'm doing, which is building a portfolio of my work and showing my skills to my teachers and my parents and my peers sort of over and over in this iterative way, like that's really where the ownership lives. But it's also true that kids can do things like pick where they sit at lunch, mostly in classrooms at tables, but sometimes they sit in weird out-of-the-way places where adults can't see them, and then we have to monitor them very carefully by doing hallway duty. But it is, I think it's really important to the culture of the school that they have that. So there's the formal autonomy, which is everywhere and important, but the informal autonomy to me, which is really the spirit of the place, is the most important thing. And that's something that it exists because the faculty all believe that that is the way it needs to be. And so the students all believe that. And that is, yeah, that's how that works. It's delicate and complex, I guess.
I actually have a question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask, and you can just pass it if you want to. But one of the things that we found when I was working at Sparhawk is when you have a new teacher come in, there's a certain period of adjusting their understandings of how it works. Do you understand what I mean? It's a nice way to say it.
So Parker is so confusing. We literally have, so when you're a new teacher at Parker, you have to come early in summer planning so that all of the acronyms can get explained to you because it's so hard to figure out what anything is. What is a PLP, right? Like that's a personal learning plan, but really it's the report you write after your parent conference. Like every single thing in the school works in a slightly odd way that isn't what you're used to. So yes, there's a lot of just literal culture shock with any new hire of any age. The cultural piece, I think, I don't have a lot of memory of a lot of teachers having a really hard time dealing with like being called by their first name instead of, you know, Mr. or Ms. something. Like people seem to work that out pretty fast. I think there have been a few people over the years, but like really not very many, who've had a lot of trouble culturally, where just the lack of strict hierarchy and the feeling that they're supposed to give kids some room has been really tough on them. And that's a thing that isn't going to work for people in the same way that like, you know, Parker's also hard for kids. So
yes,
a lot of the 7th grade year is getting kids acclimated to the way Parker works and also to the expectation, because it's sort of funny that like the way I talk about it, because I've been there so long, I'm so used to it, I'm so comfortable, I'm so happy. But if you're a 7th grader at Parker, you're a 7th grader whose parents decided we're not going to send you to your local middle school or your local high school or whatever, because you could come in 7 through 9. We're going to send you to this other place where they have lots of acronyms we don't understand. And they did they did like a info session, but one info session doesn't give you enough information. And so they're trusting us very much. And if you are a 7th grader, you probably don't trust us that much because it wasn't wholly your decision. And also there's an expectation that you're going to accept the culture that you are in. And we expect a lot of kids, like just not just in terms of their academics, in terms of like how they're going to treat other people. And that is and themselves. And that is a challenge. So I guess I'd say, there's a lot of adjustment to be made.
Well, especially because if they come in 7th, they had a middle school year in 6th, most of them.
Yep.
And so you have the culture of middle school where you are told where to go, what to do.
Yeah.
You know, here's your planner, fill it out minute by minute. This is your path to the end of the semester, and to go into an environment in which you're expected to have more agency over the structure of what you do and where your interests lie, that's a huge change.
We literally have a program called 7th Seminar, which is designed for 7th graders, basically with the guidance usually of the senior who is getting volunteer time added to their graduation requirements for doing it, but that's not really why they do it. They could do it a different way. So the seniors help 7th graders basically adjust to the fairly high executive demand requirements of being a student at Parker. And I have to say, you're right about the coming in from 6th grade middle school thing. There are lots of kids who will come in with, oh, this is what my middle school was like, and we had this teacher, and they were so difficult, and here, but some of them, like a not insubstantial number, are coming in from homeschooling or Montessori schools or things where there was very little structure. And so they're coming in and they're like, why am I in prison? Why can't I just wander out of the room at any moment? Don't they respect my freedom? And we're like, well, we do, but this is what being in class means.
You'll learn that in 12th grade when you take history of prisons. This is actually not a prison, but I understand your perception.
Yeah, the kids got Foucault's point real fast in that class, actually. That was unsurprising to me. I sort of started down that thing and they were like, we get it already.
Yeah.
Right, it's school. You're talking about school. I was like, yes.
Okay. We've talked before about creativity and designing curriculum, and when you talk about the history of prisons, it's like, I want to take that course. I can't afford it. So, can you talk about the impact of the teaching model on teacher creativity?
Yeah. I think that the amount of interesting work that teachers produce is just the marvel of the school. It's the thing that makes Parker a place. Well, there's lots of things, but I think it's the number one thing that makes Parker a place that kids talk about as being life-changing and parents talk about as being exciting. We have every year there's a professional development day where we have to come and do these CFG protocols, which basically means that we sit in a circle and use a protocol to look at a teacher's work and sort of talk about what it's doing well, how it could be better, ask questions about it. And we actually do this once a month, but once a year I get to do it in a way where I get to see work from the MST teachers, so the math science side of things or the Spanish side of things. And they are creating all kinds of amazing stuff. They are having their kids make infographics on the impact of oil drilling and working out these are 8th graders, and they're working out the math on what's going to happen if you drill to get this type of chemical or use fracking in this type of way. And they're drawing little blow up diagrams of things. And the teachers talking about was this requirement taking them too far afield, or am I asking them to do too much, or is this skill specific in the right way? And we're trying to work out which things are correct, and are they doing the right balance of calculation versus visual impact. But really the point is they're applying themselves to a real problem. Right? It's amazing what this teacher has done. And actually, sure, there are ways that particular teacher could improve that thing, but already just its existence is so cool that a room full of 15 teachers are inspired and excited to think about it. And when you go in every year at the beginning of the year for a couple weeks before school starts, also we go in for a couple weeks before school starts. That's a useful thing to do. Yep. Especially if you're teaching in Division 1 or Division 2, you're talking with a group of 6 people about, okay, 2 years ago when it was an American year last time, here's what we did. Which ones of these assessments do we need to change? Which ones do we want to keep the same? What's the thing that we want to try now? Hey, we've got 2 new members of our team. They have different expertise. How can we leverage that into what we're doing? So where are those adjustments going to be? And I gotta say, like, I have friends who work as reading specialists or other types of jobs where you kind of move from school to school, who will talk about, like, teachers really want curriculum to be handed to them in a binder so that they can go down the line. I've never met anyone at Parker who is even slightly interested in that.
I've never met anyone in public school who doesn't resent that, to be honest with you. But maybe that's the people I choose to talk to.
I don't know. I guess what I would say is my belief about teachers, based on my life experience, which may be significantly biased, is that what everybody wants to do is design curriculum that is filled with stuff that is interesting to do by their lights and present it to kids, and then they'll just keep messing with it until it works, because that's the joy of the job. I think every teacher would do that if they could. I just work at a place where you can.
Years ago, when No Child Left Behind first came in, there was a 5th grade teacher who I just loved in the school that my kids went to, and she said, and I was like, Sue, I can't wait for next year when Jack has you. And she was like, I'm retiring. I said, why? She said, the thing I love about this job is creating curriculum and doing it with kids and watching that excitement. And that's what was taken out of the job completely in the effort to pass the test in the early years of pass the test. And she did. She retired. And I just felt like, oh, that's a crime, okay?
Do you know in Virginia the tests they have to take are called SOLs?
Well, until recently in New Hampshire and Vermont, they were the kneecaps.
Are they? Is everyone just being sarcastic? The reason I know that is because during COVID, I started an educational book club with some people. So we were reading books on education and like, I'm sorry to admit this on the radio, but like, it was largely a lot of DEI things that we were interested in at the time. I know, it's so terrible. But so we were having these conversations, and the guy I was talking to from Virginia said, oh, well, I don't know what I said. But he's like, oh, we can't do the thing you're talking about because we have to spend 6 weeks of the year studying for the SOL, which just, like my whole class is, I mean, if you take out all the time, because there's a bunch of procedural things we have to do, like, I don't really have that much time starting in the second semester to get my stuff done anyway. If you imagine taking 6 weeks and another week for standardized testing out, basically no learning would happen in the entire second semester. I don't know how this person gets through a year. Like, that
no
just
learning
seems,
happens in the entire second semester.
Right, but that seems, it just seems so perverse and unnecessary to me. I don't know. It's very sad.
It's creepy, and it de-skills teachers and puts them in the level of sort of functionaries, where there was a school in New Hampshire that I was observing in, and they did what were called NIWA testing, NIWA, and it was pre-testing for the kneecap. What the NIWA did was every month the kids would take it, and it pre-tested for the kneecap, and it was supposed to predict success on the state test.
Oh, great. And so they don't have to take the other one.
And what it generated was, for every kid, this child does not understand this math concept. He should focus on page 35, sections A and B. This child, yes, every child, and the teacher was required, every teacher was required to have this purple folder on their desk so that the principal could be sure that that teacher was teaching those specific NIWA identified skills to the kids, so each kid became an individual player. There was no community left in the room, and the principal of that school used to walk the halls and check through the windows to make sure that that was happening.
Right, which makes perfect sense because their metaphor of education is teacher as worker, student as product. And I think if that's what you think you're doing, then yeah, of course, your teachers are basically assembling things on an assembly line, and your principals are essentially quality control.
Yes.
I think that's a terrible way to treat human beings at every level of that process. But I get
no one
why
was happy.
I get why somebody who isn't in education would think that was a good idea.
Well, the really entertaining thing was that it turned out the NEWA grossly underestimated the failure rate on the New Hampshire state test. So the school was like, we're great. The NEWA says we're going to do great. And they ended up as a school in need of improvement. It was just like this surreal cosmic joke after they had spent the entire year doggedly tracking what NEWA told them to track.
Can I ask you a really naive question? This is a naive question from a person who works at Parker and just feels like
at his
job. I like my job. You said a thing at the salon about, teaching is becoming less fun, and I thought, no, it's not. Teaching is exactly as fun as it always was. It's kind of stressful. My work-life balance is not always great, but it's a fun job. Yeah. I do it because it's fun.
It is fun.
A thing that I've always wondered about is it feels like it takes tremendous infrastructure to make all the kids take the test.
Yes.
And we know that the test is not a great way of demonstrating, like, if what you want to know is what can kids do and under what circumstances can they do it, which is how you should assess children.
Yeah.
Academically, like, pretty obviously. I don't know how you argue with that. Why are we not using a state-based portfolio system? That's clearly better. I get that it would require a big infrastructure, but if we just took all the test people and said, instead of doing that, you're going to look at projects and read things, what's the bad thing that would happen? Why haven't we done that?
Because of the money. Initially, the MCAS was supposed to be 3 parts. It was supposed to be portfolio assessment, performance task assessment, and a standardized instrument. And they quickly realized that they didn't have people to review those portfolios. And they came to schools of education and said, would your ed students be willing to do this for free? And schools were like, no. And they realized there are 263 school systems, or 236. I can't remember, in Massachusetts alone. Yeah. And all of those, they didn't have anybody to review the portfolios. And then they were like, what are we going to do with the portfolios? Because this was before, you had your widespread web storage and stuff. And so they were like, okay, we won't do that. And then we'll do performance task, and then they didn't have anybody to watch the performance tasks. And they didn't, in Vermont, they jumped that shark by doing sampling. So they'd have 3 kids in each class do the performance task, and it's pretty robust. If all 3 kids can do it, you can assume that those are the levels at which the class can do it. So if you have somebody who does it at, let's say, a B level, someone who does it at an A level, and someone who does it at a C- level, you can assume that that's the spread in the room. And so they did that, and then the first time...
So the kids are randomly selected for the performance
they're randomly
task.
selected. Okay. The classroom teacher has nothing to do with it. But but that's really why. It was a money thing. Huh. It was a money and personnel thing. Gross. But anyway, I have one more question.
No, thank you for answering that for me. I've wondered about that forever. Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
No, the intent was that would...
And the tests are really cheaper? It's cheaper to do it that way?
They're not cheaper, as it turns out. The initial... is it cheaper than portfolio assessment? I don't know. You'd have to punt the tests to pay for the portfolio assessment.
We definitely should do that.
I know. You're not telling me the news. Yeah, okay. No, I'm with you, babe. Okay. I just want to ask, what would you say is the most important quality of the leadership at the school?
Okay. Well, there's probably all right, I'm going to give a better answer in a second. I'm going to just give my impolite answer first. The best quality of leadership at the Parker Charter Essential School is that they see their role fundamentally as, it's actually a good answer, as supporting teachers. You had a conversation about admin on a previous podcast, and there were a bunch of archetypes that you gave, and I'm going to suggest one that you have not suggested already, which is there are administrators who may know what you're doing or may not know what you're doing because they don't come from the same skill area as you do. But they do understand what teaching is. And so they're with you on that level. And they think their job is to develop you. And I have never met a teacher who's not in need of development. I don't think that that's a thing. We all need to get better. We all need to, sometimes we need to refresh skills that get rusty after a few years or stale. And I think that the quality that I like about the administrators is they keep most of the nonsense that would make my job hard away from me. But the things that are my job, they demand in ways that I don't always enjoy, but feel like are reasonable, that I be accountable to myself and to them about those things. So there's times when I'm, where they're like, we have to sit and think about goals. And I'll be like, I hate this. But then if I think about a goal that really is authentic, and then the person really will sit down for me for 40 minutes and talk about like, okay, what did you try? Why do you think that part worked? Why do you think that part didn't work? What are you going to do next? Can you write a little bit about that so that we remember this conversation? That approach is like, I don't, again, it's work, but I think it's work that keeps everybody honest. And sometimes when you have an issue where, because of turnover, for example, you'll get a division that is very young, very new to teaching. It's really useful to have that approach because those people are having to hone their skills really fast while also, being confronted with a new group of kids who they have to acclimate as though they're the experts. And so I think that's why our administration is good. They are trying to make us better, and they are trying not to bury us in nonsense. I should also say that the dean of studies will frequently say / joke that her job is very much keeping all of the things that the state wants teachers to think about away from us, and while translating what we're doing to the state so that they will be satisfied, so that we can do the things that we do well. So she really sees herself as functioning as a shield to a large degree, and I'm very grateful for her.
One of the things that you said in that meeting after the meeting was about this theory of administration, and I liked it so much I was like, I should interview him. Little things. The other thing about having that kind of back and forth about what you do, how did it work, what do you want to revise it, what were the student outcomes and stuff, is that it makes it less pejorative when you have a new teacher, young teacher, for that to be part of what happens with them, because everybody in the school is doing that kind of reflective practice. Sure. And that makes a huge difference, as opposed to, well, you've only been here 2 years, so you still have to go to the new teacher orientation meetings, and as opposed to this, it's kind of like this is a community of teaching scholars who are talking about what we do, which is teaching practice and how did it work. And one of the biggest losses for me of Bob Colby's death is that I don't have someone to talk about that with. And I miss it a lot.
I should say, communication among faculty is really a big part of why Parker works. And the fact that you are going to meet with your domain team, so your arts and humanities department essentially, at least once or twice a week for an hour. You're going to meet with your division, so everybody who's teaching 9th and 10th grade or whatever. Usually about once a month, there's about a 2-hour meeting with them. You're going to meet with the full faculty probably once or twice a month to talk about programmatically how the school is working, what our kids need, what we're focusing on. Right now, the thing that we are focusing on in terms of our own development is goals around differentiation in the classroom, which is a thing that we kind of have to pick it back up every 5 or 6 years. You have to go back through all the things because you just forget, because it's the hardest thing to do.
Yes.
Because whole class instruction is so much more efficient from a planning standpoint. It's not really great for kids.
Yeah.
So figuring out how to and also there's new people by then.
Yeah.
So figuring that out is a thing we're doing right now, but there's kind of a set of themes that we tend to work through. But all of that, and there's also this critical friends group thing that I talked about earlier, where you're going to bring problems that you have as a teacher and just talk about them. And it might be a planning problem, and it might be this kid keeps giving me these weird outcomes I don't understand, and we'll problem solve it. Right now, my CFG is focused entirely on artificial intelligence and trying to figure out how do we use this well as teachers, and how do we stop kids from using it badly? And they use it badly in a variety of ways. Like sometimes it's like not that they're using it immorally, it's that they're literally using it like badly.
I've heard, we've talked about this, and the students, my eyebrows go on fire. I'm just like, oh my God. Because they have 15 different ways that you can utilize it, some of which probably helpful, and others of which are soul-numbingly bad. Yeah. And it's a tricky little new kid on the block.
So this is going to be related to nothing. I just want to tell you this because I think it's an interesting educational tidbit. A thing that I learned this year about artificial intelligence is that lonely, socially awkward boys really benefit from having an AI help them with research. And I did not think that that was a real thing. And then I watched some kids use this thing to say, hello, I am looking for this. Can you help me find it? And the AI is very polite and responsive and tells you exactly what you're hoping for. And then you get to refine your search, and it just feels like there's a friend who's helping you do research all the time. And if you're a person who feels like there's a lot of social pressure coming from the teacher, like I don't necessarily want to show my peers my work because they might not understand, like having this like endlessly friendly, non-judgmental thing that appears to be an intelligent person telling you useful things that you can use turns out to be very affirming and empowering, and not just in a way where like you can get more done, in a way where like you are motivated to get things done because you are no longer constantly feeling like doing this work requires you to feel picked on and as though you're failing and alone. Right, exactly. Yes. And so that like realizing that was very disorienting because I sort of came in thinking AI is the bad guy and I'm going to fight it, and it turns out no, not always. Yeah,
my take on it is the same as social media. It's like there's no point in saying it's the bad guy because it is. It is, and we're not going to be able to remove it. So how are we going to be able to, harness it in a way that doesn't shred individual thought and crush innovation?
Yeah, although you have to keep talking to kids about it because what social media they're using and how they're using it changes every year. So I will design something and think like I am tuned in the hip ways of the children, and they'll be like, Ryan, nobody understands what this is. This is for olds.
Yeah, I have kids that live with me, and I've learned a lot this year about social media and what it is. And
this year I learned that Snapchat is just for old people.
Dead.
Nobody does that.
That's
what's wrong with you?
And the difference between what you put on TikTok and on Instagram,
right? Night
and day,
right? Of course.
And now I'm like, okay. So I'm still horribly uncool, but I understand why I'm uncool now.
Yeah, no, that's
probably
that's the first step in the getting past the Dunning-Kruger. Yeah.
All right. I'm not going to ask you what you get out of work there because it's so clear. You talked about it the whole time, unless there's some final statement you want to make about it.
Yeah, the final statement I want to make about it is to any teacher who is listening to this, if you can find a place like Parker, where you get to do all the things that you thought would be cool, please work there. And if you are working at a place that seems like they might be that way, try the things you always wanted to try, because that will make your career feel fulfilling. At least that's what does for me.
That's a lovely ending. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't do the gracious thing because
That's
I'm
okay.
ungracious. In the next episode, I continue the exploration of constructivism in schools. In the meantime, if you have a story about constructivist practice in your school, please DM me in my Instagram account, education, CLUSTERF_CK. What could that possibly mean? Or email it to me at educationclusterfck@gmail.com, and I'll share them at the next episode. I'll leave out your name if you prefer. As always, thank you for listening. If you have time, please post a review or share this with someone you think it would be useful for. I'll talk at you in about 2 weeks on March 28th.
J like the letter, I'm making several waves. I know the mission is same. I made a splash, now all of my passes last like running a race with Usain. I keep it coming like this is buffet. And if I'm stumbling, I'm in the grave. Never gon' fumble it. I get the bag and I run with it, gunning it, gunning it, gunning it, gunning it.